We're live. Hello, everyone. It's your favorite ex-Muslim, Abdullah Sameer, and I'm joined by your favorite Christian, David Wood, Christian Apologist, I guess you can say. How are you doing, David?
I'm doing just fine there.
Great, great. I already see comments, people writing, "This is the unholy alliance." Like what's going on? Like it's such. People are so tribal. It's like you can't even have a conversation with someone outside of your immediate religious or irreligious group. But
Yeah, I found that too, and it is weird because it on both sides. It could be Christians who are concerned about Islam, and so they follow me, or atheists who are concerned about Islam, and so they follow you, or apostate prophet. And then, but then, as soon as there's anything that looks like a team up, then it's hey, you guys, you have to, you can't do that. You have to shun everyone who disagrees with you on the big issues. So,
and the other thing I find quite funny about that is, you have atheists who claim to be free thinkers, who claim to be in pursuit of rationality, and we don't have anything to do with these dumb religions. We're so much better than you guys. But as soon as it's like you even talking to a Christian guy or even a Muslim guy, it's like, oh, raise the alarm bells. Like, what's going on here? So because I find
you're going to be infected. You're going to be infected by them.
Well, you never know. We might actually, some good might actually come out of it, some change of perspective on both sides. But it's just like the tribalism it's like so hardwired inside us, eh? Like you just can't get rid of it.
Yeah, I know. Like because this has been going on for years. My view is, if someone says something that is true, it's true, regardless of what the person might think on other issues. Now, you might not want to affirm what someone, like if someone is in the KKK and they say something that just happens to be true, you don't want to say, "Ha, what a great statement," and then be promoting that person. But I remember that this started years ago when I would post videos from Condell, just because he was just wrecking certain claims of Muslims and so on, and doing it in really witty fashion. And so I would share some of that, but it would be, "How dare you share him? He's an atheist. How dare you share his comments? Do you know what he says about Christianity?" Like, yeah, but what he's saying right here is absolutely right on the money. What he says elsewhere, then you could object, but right, what he's saying here is right on the money. Anyway, yeah, it's can't do that, man.
Absolutely. So I wanted to kind of start out by getting a bit of an introduction for you. Obviously, you're quite well known, and I think I would be quite surprised if anyone on my channel didn't know who you are. But let's actually step back a bit. Let's go back to your background. So you were actually you grew up as an atheist, or like what happened? Your family is Christian, like your mom and dad were Christian, but you didn't believe in it. How did you end up atheist?
My grandma was my grandma is a Christian. As far as when I was growing up, yeah, matter of fact, someone said right here in the comments, Legote Bronzo, were you raised as a Christian? No. If you would have asked my mom if she believes in God or something like this, she would have said yes, and my dad would have too. But they weren't together, and all I knew about my dad was he was like a blasphemer. He said he was God, right? He would say that he's God. He didn't believe it. It's just a form of mockery. But if you had nailed him down and said, "Do you really believe?" "Yeah, I believe. I just don't believe he cares that much." No, as far as my background, when I was born, my dad was a drug dealer. Not like, this is before like crack was popular and stuff. So it was like marijuana and stuff. And
marijuana is popular again now.
Yeah. So
it just became legal in Canada.
Yeah, it's funny because my dad told me when I was growing up, he told me how he ended up joining the military eventually. But I asked him why he joined the military. He said he got in trouble, and they basically told him, "Look, go join the military, and we'll let you slide on some charges." But he told me he got caught with six pounds of weed coming back from Mexico. And I told that to my mom recently. She goes, 6, more like 60. And so that was interesting. But my mom was had a knack for getting into trouble too. She was at the time when my dad got locked up for his 60 pounds or whatever of marijuana. My mom was already on probation because she was part of a carload of people who set a cop's house on fire and then shot a shotgun into the cop's house, and it didn't hit the cop. It hit a kid. It didn't kill the kid or anything. But some of the like pellets from the shotgun hit the kid in the leg and so on. Wow. So anyway, but she wasn't the one doing it. She was just with them and so on. So no, I actually come from I come from trouble. I come from trouble, and so I grew up in a West Virginia trailer park. It's not that atheism or nothing. None of that was promoted. No one cared, right? No one in my family really cared about any of these things, except my grandmother. If I went to visit my grandmother, then she would go to church on Sunday. She would make me go. It was the most horrifying, boring time of the week. I would actually go and I would sit right next to this little clock on the wall, and I would just stare at that clock for an hour, waiting for it to be over. And then I would run downstairs because they would have like donuts and brownies and stuff like that. But don't remember ever hearing anything that remotely interested me in any of that. And that was pretty much my whole life. So that's my experience with religion when I was young. And I don't remember how old I was when I was when I officially considered myself an atheist. I don't remember ever believing in God or it ever being a real issue, except when I would be enraged at someone. I would, God, if you exist, will you strike this person down and kill him for annoying me, right? Stuff like that. But apart from that, just never an issue. I don't remember. I know that I was an atheist by like 13 or 14 because I remember, getting into arguments or discussions about it or telling. I don't remember the dates or times. I was like 14 or 15 when I told my family that I was an atheist. But I believed that there was no God at least a couple years before that. But yeah, so it's a little foggy because you're not looking for firm positions if it's just not an issue to you, and it wasn't for most of the time.
Did philosophy? You took philosophy at university. Did that have anything to do with your disbelief? The lack of belief?
No. Well, I mean, I studied philosophy when I was an atheist. I was always interested in philosophy, mainly ancient philosophy back when I was an atheist. So the works of Plato, also the Stoic philosophers, Epictetus mainly. Marcus Aurelius, didn't like him too much. Musonius Rufus, but Epictetus I really like. He was an ex-slave, and his master had beaten him so bad that he was like permanently disabled, and master eventually freed him, and he started his own school of philosophy. So I thought that was a really interesting guy, and he said some totally awesome stuff. So but that was as far as studying academically in school, that was after I became a Christian. So that was after I became a Christian, after I spent years in prison, then got out, then went to school. And even then I started off college. We're sort of skipping ahead here, but I started off college as a biology major because I liked biology and stuff. And then I just took a philosophy class because it was required. I went in there and I was like, wait a minute, this is what I like. I like this way more than the other stuff. And so
okay,
focused on philosophy.
So fast forward, how did you end up becoming Christian then?
Well, yeah, it's kind of a long story. I know we don't want to take an hour on this, so I'll give a super condensed version. But those who know my background know I've got psychological problems. I've got some issues. But when you're growing up with those issues, you don't know that, hey, these are actually clinically diagnosable things that other people have. All you have is your first person experience. Yeah. And if you're not talking to a psychologist, you don't know that you're weird. You think everyone else is weird if they see things differently. So yeah. Started I was 5 years old and my dog died. I'd had that dog as long as I have memories. And the dog got hit by a bus, and I remember sitting there, and I see my mom getting a phone call, and she's getting teary-eyed, which is weird because she hated this dog. But she's getting teary-eyed, and she turns to me and she says, "Goliath got hit by a bus," and I'm just, I started thinking, well, so what? It's a dog. What are you crying about? And so I thought like my mom was weird for getting upset over a dog dying. And of course, later on, found out that other people tend to get upset when something or someone dies. And that just kept, those kinds of things kept happening up until I was 16, and one of my best friends died. My friend Jimmy Lindholm. He'd always, the whole time we were growing up, talked about wanting to go parasailing. He finally goes parasailing, his harness breaks, boom, dead. And there the situation was, I'm sitting there thinking, wow, I have the same reaction I had when animals and pets died and other people died, but it seems like I should be bothered by this now, right? Mm-hmm. So it made sense to me when I had no reaction at all to animals dying. Like, they're stupid animals, right? Who cares, right? But here I was like, this should be bothering me somehow, but it doesn't. I just don't care at all. So anyway, it wasn't until years after that I was actually diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, where so that's basically psychopaths and sociopaths. That's their disorder. Right. We don't form normal emotional attachments to people, lack empathy. So if someone is going through horrible pain, normal people, that affects them somehow. It doesn't really affect. So we can still say, hey, that's wrong or something like that, but we don't feel anything. And no remorse for bad actions. If you do something, I hear that normal people can feel something bad if they've done something. Afterwards they feel, oh, this is a bad feeling. For the record, I have no clue what you're feeling. I've never felt it. I've never felt that once in my entire life. Oh, wow. But again, when I'm 15, 16, 13, 17, I don't know. Hey, I've actually got a mental problem, right? Yeah. I think, hey, I make perfect sense. It's everyone else who is controlled by their emotions. So I started concluding that I had evolved to a higher stage of humanity beyond other people. Yeah. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Right. Humanity had finally shaken off those moral feelings, like we shook off some vestigial tails or something like that. We don't need that thing we don't need it anymore. We can finally be, purely rational and so on. And so anyway, long story short, I became obsessed, thinking that I was like the next stage of human evolution. Everyone else was inferior to me. Other people were garbage. But I noticed that my behavior had been influenced by people throughout my life. I had no problem stealing, breaking into places, fighting, things like that. But I was still obeying the rules that I'd been told about, not killing and not doing really, really horrible stuff, and started looking into why that was. And I started feeling like I'd just been brainwashed, right? Like people had been brainwashing me since I was a little baby into thinking that I'm not supposed to do these things. And so I became convinced that I had to do the opposite. I had to start doing the opposite of what people have been teaching me to do. And that's how I'm going to sort of liberate myself from being infected by all of these inferior beings who would force their morality upon me. And so did a bunch of things along the way. The one that actually got me in jail was I attacked my dad with a hammer, left him for dead, but he actually survived. He had brain damage and so on, but he survived. I was stuck in a mental hospital first, then jail, another mental hospital, more jail, and was actually in jail. You put 18. That was actually you put 18 years old when I became a Christian. I see it in the description right here. That was actually when I committed my crime. I was 20 when I was 20 when I became a Christian. It was somewhere right around my 20th birthday. But I'd been in jail for a little while, and I was in a camera cell at the time. I was in a camera cell at the time because they thought I was trying to kill myself by starvation, and they didn't know the reason I was dying of starvation was that I'd gotten into this fasting battle with a Christian in the dorm that I was in. So we're in a dorm of inmates, and there was a Christian in there. He was a Christian who had turned himself in for 21 felonies. So he went and joined the Navy and was out in the ship and just went in and started confessing, hey, I'm a Christian. I can't just leave all this stuff undone. Here's everything I've done in my life. When they got back to the United States, he went into a police station. Here's everything I've done in my life. They said, okay, we're putting you into jail right now. And so they stuck him in there, and he was with me. And I saw this guy up on his bunk reading his Bible one day. And I walked up to him and I said, hey, you know why you're reading the Bible? You're reading the Bible because you were born in the United States. If you've been born anywhere else, you believe in something else. If you've been born in China, you'd be a Buddhist. If you've been born in India, you'd be a Hindu. If you've been born in Saudi Arabia, you'd be a Muslim, because people like you believe whatever you're taught to believe. And that was interesting, because I mean, everything that I believed as an atheist at that point was stuff that I'd heard like in classes or something like that, or from friends. It's not like I went out and trekked my own. I mean, as far as my beliefs about myself, yeah, that didn't come from other people. That came from like delusional thoughts and so on. But as far as what I believed about the universe, I didn't get that stuff from going out and researching everything and, forming my, putting together my conclusions based on all the latest information. I just heard my teacher say a lot of these things. So anyway, a little hypocritical. But this was like the first Christian I'd ever met who like put up a fight. Other times in like school, mainly the last 2 years of high school, is where I would actually start arguing with people, with Christians and so on, about any of these issues. But they never wanted to argue. You'd say something, and then they'd say something back, and then as soon as you start pushing a little harder, then it's, guys, come on, we don't want to cause a scene here or something like that. But this guy just started. Yeah, he was all over me, and it was mainly challenging things. I would say something. Go, where'd you get that? And I don't know where I got that. I don't. So he's asking for my reasons for believing certain things, and a lot of times I didn't. So anyway, he really started ticking me off. So I started trying to get back at and beat him in other ways. And one of the ways was he was the first person I'd ever seen in my life who fasted for 7 days straight. He went 7 days on nothing but water. And I said, all right, I'm going 10. I never fasted a day in my life. So the first time I ever fasted was for a 10-day, nothing but water stretch.
Wow.
So I did that. And then I ate for 2 days. And then I said, all right, I'm going another 10 just to rub it in. So I did it just on rage, trying to beat a Christian. Right. And so anyway, we kept sort of going back and forth. He wasn't trying to compete with me. Just anything he did, I would do it a little longer. Anyway, he eventually went 40 days. This guy went 40 days he went 32 days. I know, because we were friends by then. He was giving me all his meal trays, but he went 32 days on nothing but water. And then he had like Kool-Aid, so just liquids to prepare his body for food again, then finished his 40 days and then finally ate. He told me that Jesus had done it. I said, cool, I'm going to go 42, beat you and Jesus. And I was on, I believe, day number 11 when I passed out in the dorm. A police officer saw me. The guy said, I got up and I was walking, and they said I looked like a snake standing on my tail. They said I was just going like this, and then they said, boom, I just went straight down and hit my head.
Oh my God. Is there like a Christian biblical basis for this fasting? Because I thought only Catholics fast. No. Fasting is it's not as emphasized anymore as it was in early Christianity. But if you ask a Christian today what the disciplines of a Christian are, like what are the things that you should do, to further yourself spiritually as a Christian, you only hear like 4 or 5 things. You'll hear prayer, Bible study, fellowship with other believers. You hear a couple things like that, and then maybe fasting you might hear. Whereas if you go back to the early church, these things were emphasized a lot more, and it was other things. It was like periods of solitude, periods of silence. And you can see these things straight out of the Bible, right? It'll say Jesus went up by himself on a mountain in the middle of the night, in the dark, to go out and pray. The early Christians said, oh, okay, well, if Jesus did that, we should obviously be doing it too. So I need to go get away from everyone, just be out in the dark and so on. Simplicity, living a simple life, frugality, not being wasteful in spending and stuff when you could do better things with your money. So these are all emphasized, but there were like around a dozen important disciplines in early Christianity, and then about 7 or 8 more minor disciplines that were emphasized, that were things. This is what you need to do to be a good spiritual person, to further yourself spiritually. Part of the problem in Christianity is that we don't do most of those things anymore, and so we're sort of out of whack. So is that like the 5 pillars of Islam? That Christianity has prayer, salah, fasting, Saum.
It's exactly the same as the 5 pillars of Islam, and you will get beaten. You'll get beaten if you don't do this.
You just proved Islam is true, because Muhammad said, the Quran said that fasting was prescribed for you guys, like it was prescribed for those before you. Yeah. So you just made the Quran correct.
That's how I roll. That's how I roll. I support the Quran whenever I can. But yeah, so these are basically and by the way, there's a reason you find parallels around the world, right? Like meditation and fasting and things like that. Those kinds of things really do help you, solitude, going out in the middle of nowhere, getting away from people, right? Those things can focus your mind and stuff like this. So whatever you're focusing on, it can these basic disciplines can help. But so as far as Randy, Randy was fasting. He was fasting because he realized, hey, I can do long-term fasting if I'm in a jail dorm, right? It's hard to do. I couldn't do it on a ship. I can do it now. Me, I was just trying to beat the Christian. But yeah, so on day number 11, I passed out, and then they conclude that I'm trying to. Well, they sent me down. They sent me down to medical and asking what I'm doing, and then they make me see the psychiatrist. They know I've got mental health problems, so they think I'm actually trying to starve myself to death really slowly. Like I couldn't come up with a better way of killing myself than slowly starving myself to death. Anyway, so they stick me in a cell back there, and it was in the cell where I thought, now I've got time to learn to refute Randy. I concluded the only reason this guy was beating me in any sort of conversation or making me feel dumb was he just happened to know more about Christianity. I didn't actually know much about Christianity. So I decided that would be a good opportunity to study and find all the problems and then go back and attack him. And then he would see that I was right, because I couldn't acknowledge that this guy was smarter than I am. If I'm the pinnacle of humanity, it makes no sense for a dumb Christian of all people to be defeating me in an argument. So it must have just been he had more information than I did. And so spent some time back there studying, and eventually it was like three things. It was like three things that were bothering me. One was I finally kind of understood the design argument. I'd had my grandmother one time. She was an operating room technician, and so one day I was at her house, and she goes, when I think about how something as simple as the human hand, I mean, how intricate and complex it is and how perfectly it works. I mean, as fast as your thoughts are firing off, that it works this well. I mean, this is an amazing machine. And so that's really the only time I'd heard the design argument before getting locked up. But there I had some books on it. I didn't think it was, I thought it was a stupid argument. I mean, come on, you've got processes of evolution, right? You could start off with something simple, and then by, random fluctuations and things, you can eventually get to more and more complex systems. So I thought atheism could get past that. And I was lying on my bunk one day, and I was just looking at the blocks that made up the wall. And I thought, if someone told me that this formed by some natural process where the simpler system led up to this, I would think that's the most idiotic thing ever. And this is just, all this is some bricks stacked up on top of each other. That is absolutely nothing. That is nothing compared to the simplest living cell, the simplest life. So it wasn't that I came to believe, hey, okay, God created the universe or anything. It just made me start thinking, why have I never thought about this more seriously? It was more like, hey, I just brushed this aside a long time ago when, wait a minute, anything, if I wouldn't accept it with bricks, why would I accept it with something that's way, way, way more complicated, way more sophisticated, without at least really studying it and then forming my conclusion? Instead, I just, I heard my biology teacher say, hey, this is how life formed, and this is how it evolved. Never occurred to me to say, hey, let me make sure she's right before I go, because these are some big issues.
So those are, just to interrupt you for a bit. So that I actually agree with you that life is amazing and life is beautiful and intricate, and especially the human body, actually all life, even bacterial life, is in its own way, like, amazing, right? Like even the single cell, absolutely agree with that. Before you go any further, I had a Muslim in the comments saying, David Wood says it's okay for Christians to fast, but not Muslims. Do you want to say something?
When have I ever in my entire life said said that it's not okay for Muslims to fast. I think that's someone who didn't understand an argument. I made multiple videos about Ramadan, but my claim about Ramadan is not that it's wrong to fast or bad to fast. It's that gorging yourself with food twice per day, which is what happens in most Muslim areas, is not fasting. That's feasting. Yeah. It should be called the Feast of Ramadan. I understand all that, there's this 12-hour period or something like this where you're not eating and so on, but it was just never what I thought of as fasting. It wasn't what fasting is in the Christian tradition, and so it's just basically for Muslims to be going around, we're the ones who fast, we're the true ones who fast. And I'm thinking, because this is when I was taking classes. One of my bachelor's degrees was philosophy with an emphasis in religious studies. So I was taking classes on various religions, and it was my Muslim professor of my Islam class who was talking about how Muslims end up consuming way more during Ramadan than they do in other months. He says food sales go through the roof. Food sales skyrocket during Ramadan. And I'm thinking, how is this fasting? On what planet is fat? You're eating more. You're gorging yourself twice per day. I mean, you're basically flipping your schedule, right? Because in most places in the world, you eat dinner and then you spend a couple hours after that, and then you go to sleep, and then you wake up and maybe you have breakfast. And so during that time, it's not that you're fasting, you're just not really eating during that time. Muslims reversed it. Say, so okay, we'll eat when the sun goes down, then we'll gorge ourselves again right before the sun comes up, and then we won't eat during these hours. Now I understand that could be you might not be used to that, but yeah. So my criticism of Islamic fasting is that it's not really fasting.
Yeah.
But as far as Muslims fasting, I have no objections to fasting. It can help you build discipline, can help you not focus on temporal things. So yeah.
I would just add that is true, although I don't think that that's obviously not recommended to do that. I guess the sunnah would be to have a light meal, but in general the sunnah is not to eat too much. But I do think there's a very important difference between, let's say, the Islamic fast and what you just told me. Is there any sort of penalty or threats or any sort of consequence for not doing the fast in the Christian fast you just mentioned to me? Is it totally optional?
Oh, no. Yeah. All of that would be optional. It's like, if you are serious about Christianity, then this is the pattern we find in the life of Jesus and in the apostles, and yep. And from experience, we just find that they do help you. In fact, I'll say this: when I left prison, so years later after I left prison, I struggled a lot more with my spiritual life after leaving prison than before, right? In other words, it was much easier to be a Christian to be a good, healthy, balanced Christian in prison than it was on outside. In prison we say on the street, right? So that means outside of prison. So it's easier being a Christian in prison than on the street. And for years I had to try to figure out why am I weaker in prayer and in every way outside than I was inside. And it wasn't until actually reading about the disciplines in early Christianity when I realized, wait a minute, you've kind of got those in prison, right? The life of simplicity and frugality and getting away from other people whenever you can. That's kind of built into life when you're in prison, and then you get outside and there are all these distractions and everything's competing for your attention, and you don't have things like simplicity and frugality and all these things, and it puts you out of whack. So when people say, oh, this person converted to Christianity in jail and then he got out and he fell apart, this shows that he was faking. No, not. I mean, it can be, but not necessarily. He might have just been in a place where I have nothing else to do but read my Bible and go to the church services and focus and pray, and I have all the time in the world from that. And then you get out and some people don't have time for that, and then they fall apart, and you think, oh, he was faking. Well, no, it's so anyway.
Exactly. I do see that. I get what you're saying there. I just want to add one thing, which was the difference I see between what you described as a Christian fast and the Islamic fast is that like all of the threats and the consequences and the like all the punishment that happen and all the guilt that's put on you that if you don't do this, like I was taught as a Muslim, every day, every fast you miss is like 40 days you have to like make it up, but you can never make it up because even if you do 40 voluntary fasts, it's not even equal to like one day of Ramadan. So and I see this for all kind of religious ritual that's forced upon people. So not just that, but also like the 5 times prayer, because you it's not optional.
Yeah.
Like you're not told if you want to better yourself, then do this. It's like you have to do this under the threat of a gun, which is a hellfire gun, right? Not a real gun. And so what it does is it unfairly robs people of their free time, right? And of their own conscience of deciding what they want to do with their life. And to me, that's a big problem, right? And that's the difference I see. Like if somebody wants to meditate, or if they want to pray, or whatever they want to do, if they're doing it of their own free will, with no compulsion and no threats and no guilting them, then by all means, like if people want to do cosplay, if people want to, whatever religion you want to follow, there's no problem with that. But when it comes to threatening people, then I have a big problem with that. And that's why, I mean, that's part of the problem I have with Christianity as well. But we can get to that later, the whole hell thing.
Just along the lines of what you were saying there, because you asked what the penalties would be in Christianity. Actually, in Christianity, you weren't even supposed to let people know that you were fasting. You weren't supposed to let it be known. You weren't supposed to let people. Now, if you're doing like corporate prayer, like you're praying with some other Christians or something, that was fine. But if you're doing like prayer on your own, you were not supposed to let anyone know that you're praying. Jesus would say, go away in your closet. Don't let anyone know what you're doing. And so there obviously can't be any penalties associated with it if you're not even supposed to be letting people know that you're doing it. But that does do away with the issue of you always have to wonder. You always have to wonder if these things are being encouraged as, you know, this big public observance, and you're penalized for not doing it. What's the merit, right? If I'm doing it because I have to and I don't have a choice, and I'm fasting because I'll get beaten or something like that, or my parents won't like me anymore or something like that, then what's the moral value? It's like if I say, if I'm out in the middle of nowhere and, you know, I can help a little old lady across the street and I do it, okay, that's cool. Well, if I do it because I see, oh, there's a bunch of people over there and I want to show off how awesome I am, so I'm going to help this little old lady across the street. Anyway, Jesus said, if you're doing it for some ulterior motive, you've got your reward. Good. So you got your reward.
Muslims say that too. Islam says that too, that whenever you do any sort of good deed, you're not allowed to tell any, well, you're allowed to, it's kind of tricky. Like, let's use the example of not like doing optional prayers, or for example, like giving in charity. If you give in charity in secret, that's considered better, but you're allowed to tell people in order to encourage them. And, you know, the science actually does show that one of the best ways to get other people to donate is to tell them that you donated as well. So, which is why fundraisers, they're always like getting people to raise their hands and very publicly donate. I'm donating, you know, at the mosque or whatever, they'd be like, yeah, 5,000, he donated 5,000. Other people are like, wow, I want to donate as well. So there's definitely a very social aspect to it. But I used to wonder, like, how does that work? And the way I saw it was, if you do something and you tell someone without showing off, which again, I'm not sure how exactly they would do that, then it's fine. But if you do it and you're doing it to show off, then that would be considered like you've got your reward. Just like Muhammad said that if you do jihad and you did it for fame, then you're not actually doing jihad. You're actually doing something for showing off, and you'll go to hell, basically. So I see some parallels there, actually. Probably don't like to hear that.
No, just to be clear. The real concern would be when you've got all these things that you're supposed to do as part of your spiritual life, but in Islam, they're forced upon you, right? So you could still be doing it for part of your spiritual life, but it's like it's almost like it makes it more difficult to be doing something for pure motives if things are forced upon you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The only reason a Christian should be doing these things is from pure motives, because if no one's supposed to be seeing you or something like that, then that's the only motivation. As far as other things like giving to charity or something like that, you actually have that a similar duality in Christianity, where you're told, don't give to be seen by other people, but we're told, let your light shine before men. So people will see your good. People are going to see your good deeds, and they're going to glorify God. So yeah, you could say there's some parallel there.
Yeah. So I just want to give a shout out. Apostate Prophet wants to know why you're such a jerk all the time.
You see what kind of rude questions people ask. This is the problem with the internet, right? People like people would never say these sort of rude things in person, but then they get on the internet where no one has to look at their face and stuff like that, and then people just type all sorts of cruel stuff.
Exactly.
Well, not me.
And shout out to genetically modified skeptic as well. He's also in the chat, so welcome. Yeah. So you're right. And like another thing about Christianity is, here's a question: if Jesus died for your sins, then you actually isn't it the case that you're not obligated to do any good deeds unless you want to, like total, like 100%? Or is there some sort of like expectation that you have to do certain things, like help ladies across the street and like stuff like that, donate in charity and help the church, and like how does that work? If Jesus died for your sins, then like isn't there no obligations whatsoever on Christians to be good?
No, I want to, I'm going to pull up a passage here. That's a common distortion. If you were to say to the early Christians, hey, now Jesus died for my sins, I can do whatever I want, they would say, well, you're not a real Christian then. You have not entered into a covenant, with Jesus. So let me read a passage here. So this is from 1 John, where he's it seems like he's addressing this. 1 John 2, verse 7, he says, I'm writing to you no new commandment, but an old commandment that you have had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word which you have heard. At the same time, it is a new commandment that I'm writing to you, which is true in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining. Whoever says he is in the light and hates his brother is still in darkness. Whoever loves his brother abides in the light, and in him there is no cause for stumbling. But whoever hates his brother is in the darkness and walks in the darkness and does not know where he's going, because the darkness has blinded him. So the idea is, if you're saying, hey, I'm in the light, I'm in Christianity and so on like this, but you're despising your brother or something like that. Notice it doesn't say, oh, you're good to go because Jesus died for your sins, so therefore you can be a total scumbag. It doesn't. It's the message is more along the lines of, hey, Jesus died for your sins, and you're entering into a covenant relationship with him. But if you think you can just go do whatever you want now, you're not really with Jesus. So stop fooling yourself.
Okay. So let's continue with your story then, and we'll get to the questions.
Where was I? Oh, so I was back in the cell. So yeah, the design argument started bothering me a little bit, but I was basically looking at the bricks stacked up on the wall, and made me start questioning what I believed about the origin of life and the complexity of life and things like that. The other thing was, I was actually studying Christianity and the lives and deaths of the apostles and stuff like that. And the resurrection started bothering me mainly when I found out how the early apostles died and the persecution that was going on. Because I always thought that I had an explanation for the beginning of Christianity. I thought, okay, these Christians believed in Jesus, other people believed in their messiahs and so on. These people believed in Jesus, but he died. Normally you would go and get a new messiah, but their guy died, and they came up with this brilliant idea. Hey, if we really want to keep his message going, keep his teachings going, why don't we say that he rose from the dead? And this would be the best way to, get people more interested in his life and teachings and so on. So for years I was done with Christianity because I thought I had an explanation. Then I found out about some of the, the horrible bloody deaths of the apostles. And I started thinking, wait a minute, if they made this up, if they made this stuff up, why would they be willing to go out and die for it? I can imagine having one weirdo who's willing to die for something that he made up. But I sat there and tried to think of anyone in history, who in all of history was willing to lay down his life for something that he knew that he made up, that he knew he was making up this story, and he went out and willingly died for it. I couldn't think of one person, but I certainly couldn't understand an entire group of people all being ready to go out and die for something they know they made up. Now, I believe that people do die for things that are false, but not for things that they just willingly make up. Again, you might get some weirdo, but here you had an entire group of people, and so it basically it made me rethink my belief about the origins of Christianity, because now the question was, what convinced these guys that Jesus had risen from the dead? Because if they're laying down their lives for it, they clearly believe in what they're saying. So what made them think that a man who had been dead had risen from the dead and appeared to them? And I just couldn't think of anything. So it started sounding like if anything was a miracle, it was this. So there was that. Oh, go ahead.
So do you not see a similarity between this story and the story of the early companions? Like Sumaya, who was one of the first woman that was murdered for Islam, and all of the believers, the early believers. I mean, obviously there were some that were going to benefit from this movement, but do you see a parallel there between Islam as well?
No. I think it's very different. Like when people ask me, do I believe that Muhammad was just making up his religion or something like that? I'm normally thinking, no, I believe that Muhammad was willing to die. Not in every single battle. Sometimes the other guys were ahead of him, but he knew that people might come after him and people were going to want to kill him. So it's the same reasoning. I'm saying, okay, if he was willing to die for this, chances are he really believed in his own prophethood. But the same reasoning would apply to his early companions, the people who are willing to, and the same thing would apply to people today. Whether you're talking about Muslims today who are flying planes into buildings or something like that, that doesn't tell me that what they believe is true. It tells me that they really believe it.
Yeah.
Same thing with Christians. If a Christian goes off to try and reach a lost tribe and then he gets killed, that doesn't tell me that what he believes is true. It tells me that he really, really, really believes it. And so, but in those cases, I say, okay, what is the belief, and how did they come to the belief, right? So how did this guy come to believe that Christianity is true? Well, we generally have an idea. He grows up in church, or he converts at some point or something like this. Same thing with the Muslims. They grow up and so on, and then they come to certain views of Islam and so on. Very easy to understand. With people's belief in Muhammad, if you look back and see why they believed in Muhammad, oh, he had this amazing mole on his back or something like this. Okay, well, if they're willing to die for that, that tells me, okay, they really believe in it. So they really believe in when he's saying that this Quran is the greatest thing anyone's ever written. If they accept Islam based on that, well, that tells me that they actually believe that the Quran is so wonderful that it could only come from God. They're actually buying that. But notice that's very different from the apostles who were claiming.
I don't see how. Can you explain one more time? What's the difference?
The difference is when we're asking what the apostles believed that they're willing to die for, that shows they really believed it. What they really believed was that a dead man rose from the dead and appeared to them. That's very different from saying, hey, I heard a message and I believe the message and now I'm willing to die for it. Or, hey, I heard this amazing Quran recitation. It was so beautiful. And now I'm convinced that it must be the word of God. All that tells me about you is that you're convinced that it's the word of God. That doesn't mean that's a great argument, because other people reject it and so on. Yeah. But so these guys are not saying, hey, I heard this message, or this was preached, or hey, this argument really impressed me. They're saying the dude was here. He came here. He talked to us. He appeared to us. He was dead. He was crucified. You all know that. It was a public event. And then he was here over and over again, meeting with us, talking to us. So there, it's the same with everyone generally, right? That if you're willing to die a horrible, bloody death for what you believe in, it means you believe it, right? Yeah. Then the question arises, how did you come to believe that, right? So how did
you're saying the early apostles believed in Jesus because they saw him raised from the dead, but you're saying the early Muslims believed in Muhammad not because they saw miracles, as is claimed in the Hadith, but because they believed in it was from God?
It's so my Muslim friend, what are you dying for? I'm dying for my belief that Muhammad is a prophet. Okay, that tells me that you really believe Muhammad is a prophet. How did you come to that belief? Does the way you came to that belief give me reason to think that is actually true? And with Islam, no, because they give very strange arguments. With the Christians, what I'm saying is what they believed happened. What changed their minds was they said a man who had been dead appeared to them. So I'm thinking, how did you come to this belief? How did you come to believe that? Well, I can't explain it through mass hallucination. I can't explain it through you saw. There have actually been explanations like maybe Jesus had a long lost twin that suddenly showed up and things like that. But so how did you get in? And basically with let me break it down in a slightly different way. If a Muslim says, I became convinced that Muhammad is a true prophet because, you know, Muhammad had this mole on his back that showed that he's a prophet, or I heard the Quran and it's so wonderful or something like that. You still have to look at the reasoning and say, okay, what's the alternative here? What's the alternative explanation? Well, you're just kind of wired to like that sound, or you've been told by someone in your past that a big hairy mole is a sign of a prophet or something like that. You've been told something. That's not a good reason for me to hear.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. The mole thing was one particular example, but most of the stories we hear about Muslims who converted because they, like, I mean, we don't know how much of the early Islamic history is true, but
that's a problem.
It's true, but but the story says they believed in Muhammad because of his character. Because I mean,
that's exactly what I mean. I mean, we can look at the same character and come to some very different conclusions. The point is, can I explain how you arrived at your belief, and look at the evidence that you saw, and think, well, there's another perfectly good explanation for what you saw that doesn't have anything to do with him actually being a prophet. When I looked at the apostles, it was, okay, you convinced a number of people, not just one I would dismiss as almost irrelevant. But it was multiple people are all convinced. And again, you had other people claiming to be the Messiah, other people killed. This is not what happens. But here you end up with a bunch of people saying, yo, that guy that was crucified, he actually appeared to us multiple times, hung out with us, told us what to do, and we're ready to die for it. You can torture us and kill us. We're not changing it. So there I think, okay, what is it? What's the alternative explanation for what you saw? Did you see some coat rack in the corner and you said, hey, maybe that's Jesus? Did you see a long lost twin? Did you all simultaneously hallucinate? You start asking these questions and you think the only way I can really explain that is, the only way that really fits is they actually saw it, is they actually saw a person appearing to them. So that's why I say that was really bothering me, right? Where you would think that as you go in there, you see that the alternative explanations are much better, right? And the miraculous and the supernatural explanation is going to be the stupid one that actually doesn't make sense. But here, it's the supernatural one is the only one that actually really fit the evidence well and didn't strain the evidence. Whereas all the other explanations, you have to avoid the facts in some way.
Yeah. So Occam's razor is basically that the most simple explanation is probably the correct explanation, and that supernatural occurrences would require much more evidence, because obviously the easier, more straightforward explanation that, you know, it was a lie or they saw a coat rack or whatever. But I still don't see any difference between like early Muslims like Abu Bakr saying, I believe you are the messenger of God and everything I've seen about you. You know, again, I always have to kind of add a disclaimer that we don't know how much of these stories are actually true, but like according to the stories themselves, they believed in him at a time when there was no benefit to believe in him. Like in Mecca, when they were being killed and persecuted and slaughtered, Muslims were believing in this man that they were just being killed for that. Like Bilal is a good example. The Bilal, the Muaddin of Mecca, eventually became the Muaddin of the Prophet, the one that would call to prayer. He was like tortured and put under hot rocks, and he refused to give up his belief in Allah, which he considered to be the only God. So for me, when you say early apostles, and there was 12 of them, I think it was 12 of them, I see the same kind of thinking that they truly believed in him, just like these guys truly believed in Muhammad.
Yeah, the argument is not, hey, they truly believed in Jesus. It's
they saw the miracle.
Yeah, it's what did you see, and what's the best explanation here? What are the alternative explanations of what you saw? Like, for instance, the belief in the early Muslims, it was fairly widespread since Jews had come into the area centuries earlier. That lots of people look to the Jews as sort of spiritual authorities, even though they're within their old systems. They're still looking to the Jews, because you see the Quran constantly appealing, "Hey, ask the Jews. Come on, you know the Jews know this. Come on, go ask the Jews." Right?
Yeah.
So they're regarding them as some sort of so in other words, you had a kind of clash of cultures there, right? You had monotheism clashing with polytheism and so on. And then you've got a guy who all of a sudden rises up and says, "Hey, I'm a prophet of monotheism. I'm on the same side as the Jews and the Christians, proclaiming one God. And I'm a prophet who's been sent to you guys. God really cares about you. He needed a revelation for you guys in your own language." And then you ask these people why they believe, and they give explanations, right? So anyway, the point here is, if Bilal, or really, I mean, a ton of people in the early Muslim community, if they're ready to go out and die for this, what does that tell you about what they saw? Well, we know what they saw, right? We know what they saw, right? That they tell us. So if it's, "Hey, Muhammad's character," or "I heard the sound of the Quran and it was amazing," that tells me that person regarded that sound as amazing. That doesn't tell me whether the Quran is miraculous. It tells me a particular person found that miraculous, right?
Yep.
With Jesus' apostles, it's, "Hey, we all saw this man after he had been killed alive and appearing with us." I think, what's the alternative explanation for that? Is that the sort of evidence that would convince me if I saw the same evidence, right? If I can hear the same Quran today. It's not, I don't find it impressive at all, right? So I can see a big hairy mole today. I don't find it impressive at all. I can read about Muhammad's character. I don't find it very impressive at all. I don't care what background it was. If a man rises from the dead and starts appearing to me, I'm going to find that quite interesting. And so
how do you? So with Islamic sources, they say that like water came from his fingers and the rocks were praising him.
Yeah.
How do you believe that Jesus raised from the dead, but not these things?
Oh, well, with Jesus, it's based on vastly earlier sources that don't contradict each other on this point, right? So when you're talking about Muhammad's miracle accounts, those start at over a century after the events. And not only that, the most important part is they contradict the Quran, right? Yeah. So in the Quran, he's repeatedly challenged. Why don't you bring a sign like the earlier people? Why don't you bring a sign like Moses? Why don't you have any signs? Why don't you have any signs? And it's constant justification, and then saying, well, the Quran is my sign. Right? So according to the Quran, Muhammad's miracle is the Quran, right? And every other, when he's challenged on all these other issues, it's, I'm only a warner. Or, well, the people in the past, they rejected their miracles. This is why you're not getting any more miracles. Yeah. So it's rejecting
other than maybe splitting the moon, which I don't even know if that's like that's just alluded to in the Quran, right? Like,
yeah, and there are different interpretations of that. Even like in Yusuf Ali, he's talking about it being a sign of the end times.
That's what I thought it was until I read the hadith. I was like, I thought that's one of the signs of the day, like when I first converted to Islam. But anyways, yeah. So okay, so continue.
Yeah. So and even on that, right? That's an early surah, right? So all of these later revelations where people are challenging, hey, how come you haven't been given a miracle? How come you haven't been given a sign? If the miracle was the splitting of the moon, and that was the miracle, the response should have been, what are you talking about? I split the moon, right? You all were standing there. What are you talking about? You all saw me split the moon, but it's not. It's, hey, I'm just a warner, not my job. I've given you the Quran, right?
Even if I showed you, you still wouldn't believe.
Yeah. So the idea here is you've got your earliest source in Islam repeatedly denying that Muhammad could perform miracles. Meanwhile, Muslims go out into the world and they go around preach, and wherever they go to Christians and Jews, the Christians and Jews are always going, what's your prophet's sign? What miracles did he perform? And all of a sudden, after a century, it's, oh yeah, we've got the ink still drying on this source here, but oh, he performed some miracles. Look at this, shooting water right out of his fingers. Right? So then you start, so anyway, so the situation there is, again, applying the exact same standard to Christianity. Can I explain very easily, with no problem whatsoever, how Islamic belief in Muhammad's miracles arose? Yes, Muhammad actually performed no miracles, but after being repeatedly challenged, they came up with some miracle stories. We have nothing early enough to take seriously. Now, with that said, if we did have very early sources from Islam confirming and showing that, people were willing to lay down their, if Bilal was willing to lay down his life for saying, look, I saw Muhammad do this, man, and I don't care if you chop my head off, I saw him do this with my own eyes. That is evidence I would actually take seriously. We don't have that in Islam, though. We do have that in Christianity. So when you're talking about the claims about Jesus, one of the interesting things in sort of a source criticism of the New Testament is, and this didn't even come from Christian scholars, this came from atheist and agnostic scholars, but they started arguing that the earliest material in the New Testament is this creed that's found at the beginning of 1 Corinthians. This is the earliest Christian creed. It goes back to an Aramaic original. The church very quickly changed to a Greek emphasis, an emphasis on spreading the message in Greek. That's why the Gospels are written in Greek. So when they find...
Why was that?
What, Greek?
Yeah.
Well, the idea is you at first you had a church in Jerusalem. So it would have been very natural for them to speak Aramaic. But very, very quickly, they started spreading the message throughout the Roman Empire. And so there you would put the message in Greek, because that's what everyone's going to understand. They're not going to understand what you're talking about if you start talking to them in Aramaic. And so this happened so quickly that the entire New Testament is written in Greek. So when you find parts of the New Testament that are very awkwardly worded in Greek, but then you translate them into Aramaic and it's all nicely patterned and stylized, you say, oh, this actually goes back to an Aramaic original. But in 1 Corinthians, if you go to actual, like even atheist and agnostic New Testament or historical Jesus scholars, they will say, yeah, you've got the Bible, and some parts we don't trust at all. Other parts we do trust, we think is reliable historical information. But your earliest Christian material, the earliest thing you've got in the New Testament, is a creed that Paul quotes in 1 Corinthians 15, where he talks about Jesus dying on the cross for sins, being buried, rising from the dead, and appearing to Peter, to James, to all the apostles, to more than 500 people at one time. And so, but Paul writes this in 1 Corinthians, and he's telling the Corinthians what he delivered to them when he visited them, which was earlier. And in that he said, I delivered to you what I received. And the idea is this is he received. He says that this is the message preached by the apostles. So he's got this creed that is what the apostles were preaching, that he received from the apostles. And so you basically put the timeline together. When did he go visit the apostles? Well, he did that shortly after his conversion when he went back to them. So anyway, people put this together and they say, look, you have an Aramaic creed that came from the apostles very early on, so that Paul received it from others. And what do you have? You have the belief, the conviction that Jesus died, was buried, rose from the dead, appeared to all these different people in all these different situations. And that's your earliest sort of Christian proclamation. When the apostles went out, they said, this is the message that, just so everyone knows, right? Back then, if you wanted to spread a message quickly, you would put it into a creed, right? This is why you have even later, even centuries later, you have various creeds in Christianity. So you have the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed. You put it into things because not everyone can read, and not everyone's going to read massive text. So you put everything into a nice little creed so that you understand, hey, this is our official position. We actually have that with the early apostles. So they were claiming that Jesus had risen from the dead and appeared to them. And we know this is what their earliest proclamation was. And we also know that these guys went to some horrible, bloody deaths over this. And so the question is, why did these guys believe that? And to this day, I've never seen a better explanation. Unless by the way, the only real response here is just, it's a miracle that doesn't happen. I'm not going to accept that it's a miracle, right? Because if you're allowing miracles or things like that, then it's kind of the best one you've got. It's kind of the best one you've got, where you've got a bunch of people who really seem convinced that Jesus had appeared to them, risen from the dead. And just so everyone understands, there's pretty much a scholarly consensus on the belief of that the early apostles were convinced that Jesus had appeared to them. So people like Bart Ehrman, all these guys who are atheists, agnostics, they will not agree that Jesus actually appeared. They will agree that the apostles believe that Jesus appeared to them. So obviously, if you're an atheist or agnostic, you can't also believe that Jesus appeared to them.
Yeah.
But this is so widespread that they will acknowledge, of course, these guys were convinced that Jesus appeared to them. We have to explain it in some other way, or just not explain it. Just say we don't know what it is. But the point is that's very different from what you find in most other cases. When you go and you say, okay, this person believes this, and he believes in this supernatural thing. He believes this supernatural event happened. And you say, okay, let me find out how this person came to this belief. It's normally assumed, this is what I was assuming, that when you go back there, it's just going to fizzle, right? Like I've come to expect that from Muslims when they say, oh, here's our latest argument. This is what proves that Islam is true. You just go and look up this argument. You're going to see that there's all this evidence there. So if you just read the Quran, you'll find all these miraculous scientific statements that couldn't be verified until centuries later. You start going to them and it's absolute nonsense, right?
Yeah.
That's what you tend to think is going to happen when someone says, oh, there's this evidence. There's some actual evidence for a miracle here. Well, in Christianity, you go there and you can still deny it. You can still say, look, I'm not going to believe in a miracle. It's just, I think it's a silly explanation or something like that. But when you go there, you find out, okay, this is really early. So it's not legend. These guys are willing to lay down their lives. So it's not something really flimsy. You had a bunch of witnesses. They're all ready to lay down their lives. Okay. There are some facts to deal with there.
Okay. So you were in jail, and you came to the point where you believed, based on your research of Christianity, that God raised Jesus from his death on the third day, and the reason you believe this, that God did this, is because there's eyewitness accounts, a bunch of them, that claimed that he raised himself from the dead. And how do we know that they claimed this?
How do we know that were claimed? We have their earliest creed. So we have that. But even then, it wasn't okay. Hey, now I believe in the resurrection. It was sort of similar to the design argument, where it's, wait a minute, I had dismissed this a long time ago. I dismissed this a long time ago because I thought that there's really just no evidence there. The evidence just evaporates. I can explain this in some other way, namely by these guys conspiring to spread the message of Jesus for making something up. And then I realized, wait, what I believed before actually doesn't fit the evidence. And what does fit the evidence is an actual resurrection. But it's not, hey, I'm just going to believe in this right now. It's kind of, okay, that's the evidence does point in that direction. Unless I come up with an alternative, that's where the evidence currently points.
And the resurrection is very, very important in Christianity, right? It's one of the main things.
That doesn't get any bigger than that in Christianity. Yeah.
So let's continue the story, then we can get back to some of the points.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try and keep it quick. So there was a kind of design argument, and then there's dealing with the resurrection. And then there was a kind of moral argument. It's not a standard moral argument. I basically realized that there was an inconsistency in my beliefs, because I always regarded like moral talk as like utter nonsense. And for the atheists who are watching, to understand the perspective, when you look at, Christians claiming things about God, and Muslims claiming things about God, and Jews claiming things about God, and all these different people claiming all these things about God, and you look at this and you say, hey, when I ask you to give me some good defense of what you believe, I don't see anything. This just makes this look like it's all a bunch of nonsense. Apply that same reasoning to someone who's looking around and saying, wait a minute, over in that country, they say this is wrong. Over here, they say that's wrong. Over in that country, there are people, their brothers will beat their sisters to death for walking down the street without a male escort. Over here, we would say, no, that's horribly wrong. Over there, it's female genital mutilation. Over here, it's an abomination. You look at that and say, now apply the same reason. And if we ask any of you to give me a good knockdown argument for why what you believe is morally right, I never get a good answer. You start thinking, it's because it's all nonsense, right? All this talk of right and wrong. Now, I believe that basically, again, since I remember thinking these kinds of things at like 14 years old and so on. But basically, hey, look, you've got this giant universe, and we're this tiny little speck in the universe. Our planet is this tiny little speck, and on that tiny little speck, you have these little blobs of cells. going around, and they're only there because of a freak accident where some things came together, and it was able to self-replicate, and then eventually went on to sexually reproducing organisms, and then the ones that were able to hump the most passed on the most offspring, and that led us to be wired in a certain way of thinking. And then we think, oh, this is the great ground for morality. I came to think that that's all. It's what seems like moral to most people is just nonsense. You're just either wired to believe things in a certain way, or you've been taught by your society to believe things in a certain way. And you feeling very strongly that certain things are right and wrong is no basis for thinking that they're right and wrong. The guy who kills his sister for dishonoring the family obviously believes very strongly that what she did was wrong and that he's doing something morally right. That tells me nothing about whether it is morally right or not. So I'm looking at all this thinking it's a big mess. But if you remember, I was thinking like I'm humanity 2.0, I'm the direction. And all of a sudden I started spotting the contradiction, right? Like, if this is all meaningless, we're these meaningless little blobs of cells, what sense does it make to think I'm this super important, awesome thing who can trample on everything else around me? How can I be the best, most important, meaningless blob of cells that's totally insignificant in the grand scheme of things? So it's basically either, for something to be the best, there has to be some sort of standard of what is the best. It can't be just, I like this better, I like that better. There has to be some standard. But if there's a standard, what are the odds that I just happen to be the standard? Pretty slim. So either there's a standard, in which case is probably not me, or there is no standard, in which case I'm not the best. Either way, my beliefs about myself are just fall apart. Did you say Muhammad?
Muhammad is the standard. That's the standard. You forgot. You missed.
Yeah, he's the pattern of conduct. But even for Muhammad to be a good moral example, there still has to be like what is actually right and wrong. It can't just be what society. It has to be something beyond society. It has to be something beyond the way you're wired. I mean, a lion moving into another pride of lions will kill all the babies. That helps that lion insert its own offspring so that they become dominant. It's wired to do that. It has nothing to do with whether it's right or wrong. So, me or you being wired to do things in a certain way, that doesn't tell us that these things are really right or wrong. So anyway, the point is, like, it's a kind of moral argument. It's not a normal moral argument just to be thinking, hey, if there's a standard, then it's probably not me. Why would I then think that I am the greatest, the greatest, most important human being in the world? Or the alternative is there's no standard, in which case it makes no sense for me to say I'm the best of anything. There is no best here. What are we talking about? You can be the best, like tennis player, something like that, because you have some criteria laid down for what a good tennis player is, something like that. Say I'm the best, most important human being. If there's no standard for what that is, it makes no sense. So basically my beliefs about myself just started to collapse. And I started thinking in terms of, well, what kind of thing could be the standard, or is there no standard? Anyway, so those were all the things that were going around in my mind. Still hadn't converted yet, but basically in a short amount of time, I went from thinking that I was the greatest, most important human being in the world to thinking I was like the worst scum in the world. Right? Once I dropped that belief that I am the next stage of humanity, it was, what am I talking about, right? I'm a guy who's sitting in a jail cell, starving to death, trying to beat a Christian. I'm in here for bashing my dad's head in with a ball-peen hammer. I'm about to be sent to my third mental hospital. What possible criteria could there be for saying I'm the best at anything, right? I mean, in other countries, there are people who are starving, but maybe they can think straight. I can't even think straight. I sit around thinking about torturing people all day. In what way am I better than anyone else in the world? And so that all fell apart. And basically, I was it's kind of a weird situation, but I was sitting there and I thought to myself at some point, this isn't getting any better, right? This is my life, right? That nothing is going to get better now, right? I'm on a trajectory. What do I do now, right? I'm going to prison. I'm going to mental hospitals. There's nothing to look forward to. This is my life, and there is nothing I can do to change any of this, right? If I'm really a messed up, screwed up, mentally deranged person, what do you do about that, right? So I was thinking, I was going, gosh, I feel like I've just been stomped into the ground by a size infinity boot. And when I said that, I remembered it was, I guess, 2 years. Trying to think if it was two. No, it was 2 years. It was 2 years earlier. I was walking home from my friend Steve's house, and it was like several miles. And this massive storm hit, and the storm was pelting me and stuff. And I remember yelling to God. I said, because lightning was actually striking around me and stuff. And I go, oh, is that supposed to scare me? If you want me to believe in you, you better come down here and make me believe. Yeah. Sort of got that from my dad. My dad had that sort of like to spit out blasphemies and so on. So I said that, and then all of a sudden I was thinking, wait a minute, I told God he's going to come down here and stomp me into the ground and make me believe. And I just said, I feel like I've been stomped into the ground. And so anyway, little other things happen. But I got to a point where, see, it's very easy, right? It's very easy. If let's say you're an atheist today and so on. This is what William James talked about. Forced options, right? Like you could be in a situation where I either have to do this or I have to do that. And I either have to believe this or I have to believe that. But some options aren't forced, right? I don't have to choose one of those options. I can put this off for years, or I can do something else. Being in that situation in a cell, it was like, no, I do have to decide what I believe now, because, you know, I've seen what my current beliefs have gotten me to. If I'm wrong about my current beliefs and I see where they're leading me, you know, if these beliefs are true and that's where they're leading me, so be it. You know, I'll just go to a mental hospital and have a fun time, because mental hospitals, believe it or not, are fun. Those are some fun places. They are not boring. If you sit back and watch, it is better than any TV show. I don't understand why someone in Hollywood has not put together a reality show about a mental hospital, assuming that there's not one already somewhere. But
ethical issues, maybe. Yeah. There might be some ethical issues with that or something.
I saw some. I could do an entire live stream series just about stuff I saw in mental hospitals. But
so I have a kind of personal question that has to do with that. Mm-hmm. So you're talking about your whole worldview shifting. You've gone from this kind of narcissistic kind of I'm the best person in the world kind of thing. I'm even and to I'm the worst person in the world. I'm a terrible person. Is that because you were reading the Bible? Is that what caused it?
No, there was
a life situation. What happened to you? It started to sink in, like, oh my God, look what I've done, kind of.
Yeah, it's when I'm doing these horrible things and I think I'm like some sort of Superman, like not like in the Nietzschean sense, or in the mainly in the sense of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Raskolnikov viewed himself as a kind of Superman who was beyond the morality of other people. Yeah. When you're viewing yourself like that, you're not doing anything wrong, and that view fits perfectly if you're a psychopath and you don't feel remorse for actions, because you take that as evidence that you are this sort of person, right? Other people are held back by these emotions. Other people are bothered. I don't. Why? Well, it's because I'm just beyond that sort of thing, right? And basically, if you're able to reflect at some point and you start realizing, gosh, look around me. Look at what I have done. Look at all the people I have hurt. And you start to, it's hard to do but I've often wondered if I could give like advice to people who want to help psychopaths as far as something that would help them. It's basically, if you come to realize that the reason you don't feel remorse, or the reason you don't get upset when other people die, or the reason you don't have empathy or something like that, if you come to view that as, it's not some special gift that you have that makes you like that, it's that you're defective. You don't have some ability that other people lack. You lack an ability that other people have. It's not because you're better than other people. It's because you're more messed up than other people, right? You're defective. And that I see is like the only help for like psychopaths. If you start sitting back and going, okay, I don't feel normal emotional attachments, but I should. I don't feel guilt or remorse, but I should. And therefore, I need to be aware that when I don't feel these things, I'm defective, and I need to try and compensate for that in some other way. But basically, all over that, I'm looking at the trajectory I'm in, and I'm thinking, okay, it looks like I may have been wrong about the universe being created. If I were a betting man, it looks designed. Everything about it looks designed. Two, if there is any sort of moral standard, I am not it. And I had been reading the Gospels, and I repeatedly thought how cool Jesus was in certain circumstances. So that did jump out at me at various times, like, wow, that's cool what he did right there, and it was certainly cooler than me. And then with the resurrection, if anyone has God's stamp of approval on his message, it would be Jesus. So if I'm going to believe anyone's saying about right now in the cell, I could obviously spend years more doing research and so on, but I don't exactly have years on my current path I'm on. So if I were to, it looks like if anyone's got God's stamp of approval, it's Jesus. He's the one who rose from the dead. So it's basically a situation of just thinking, what have I got to lose here? Right? Why would I be terrified of bowing down and praying and saying, hey, God, here I am. All right, whatever you want, just name it. What if I do that and it turns out to be nonsense? Well, it's not like I'm getting any worse. It's not like, oh, David, you're the worst person in the world. You did all this horrible stuff, but you prayed and you were wrong. And now you're really messed up. Now you're in trouble. So it was kind of a situation of, what have I got to lose if I pray and it turns out not to be true? Seems like that's something I should be trying here, because there's a lot on the line. So basically, I leaned over on my bunk, and just so everyone knows, I was down to under 150 pounds then, and wow. I'm 6'3". I'm about 260 right now. So yeah, about 110 pounds lighter than I am. I look pretty pathetic. My skin turned yellow. I had this rash all over my body. I drooled nonstop. Nasty situation. So then I sort of plopped over on my bunk, and I prayed, and I said, God, I do not know if I will believe in you tomorrow. I'll believe in you right now. If you can do anything with me, you're welcome to it. And so then in the Bible studies I was doing, they had what's called the sinner's prayer. It was at the end of these Bible studies I was doing just to keep me, for basically explanatory notes on passages I was reading while studying to refute Randy. But so anyway, I just recited a kind of prayer that I'd been reading those Bible studies. And I sat up from that prayer and looked around, and all of a sudden it just looked like everything, it looked like I was in a different world. It looked like everything had changed colors somehow. And people talk about, feeling a weight lifted off their back or something like that. I don't trust feelings much. I don't trust them much. But when people ask, what it felt like I had been physically brawling my entire life to the point where I didn't even realize that's what I was. It felt like I've been physically brawling my entire life, and then all of a sudden it just stopped. So if you can imagine, if you were thrown in this world and fighting nonstop for your entire life, and then all of a sudden, boom, everything stops and you sit down. That's what it felt like. So, yep, I was 20 years old or so, and that's when I became a Christian.
Oh, wow. And it's been quite the journey since then. So great story. Thanks for sharing that. I'd like to ask some questions then. There's tons and tons of questions in the chat. Some Muslim guys asking what happens to us when we die. So obviously David Wood and I would disagree. I would say I'm a materialist. So basically the brain, all of our consciousness, everything that we experience is a product of this little thing in our brain. And for example, if I had an accident and I went into coma, and I was in a coma for one month or 1 year, I would wake up and I'd be like, where am I? What's going on? But I wouldn't even notice that period of time was not there. In the same way that, an accident happens and someone gets Alzheimer's, they don't recognize the children, or even like my grandma, she doesn't recognize her own kids sometimes, right? And or for example, some accident happens, people have a stroke and they come back and their personality changes completely. So everything that we consider that's us is actually just our physical brain, and we can actually prod inside the brain and send electrical signals, and we can actually sometimes smell things, feel things. So as far as I'm concerned, there's no such thing as a soul. There's no such thing as an afterlife. As soon as we die, that's just it. Now, David, what do you believe? I guess your answer would be more straightforward.
Yeah, after the death comes the judgment, and Christians and Muslims would actually agree on that. There's going to be some disagreements about the criteria there.
So do you believe that, like, this is something that I ask Muslims as well. You believe that 80% of the world's population is going to go to hell because, like, 4/5 of the world is not Christian, right? So would you say they're all going to hell?
No, I wouldn't. By nature, I'm not a full-on like Humean skeptic, and I'm not what I would call a hyper skeptic by any means. But like, to just give you an example, before I was a Christian, didn't believe ghosts, aliens, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, none of that. Didn't believe in anything, gods, angels, demons, none of that. Thought it was all just total nonsense. And then after becoming a Christian, I obviously believe in the supernatural realm, but I'm also kind of skeptical about things that I'm not entirely clear about, especially when you have reasons, especially when you have some reason to think that what lots of people would say might be wrong. So let me explain what I mean here. Give an example. We are told, Jesus said that no one comes to the Father except through him, right? So no one comes to the Father except through Jesus. So you're not making it to heaven or paradise apart from Jesus. And from here on, well, not yet, but I'm about to get in trouble with some people. But you look at the Old Testament, and Christians believe in like Old Testament saints. So people who came before Jesus, before the incarnation, who nevertheless are saints. They're going to go to heaven. And so the question is, how do you what's the connection there? And then so you believe that they get, either you just say God judges them based on the revelation that they had received. So they received revelation that, hey, the Messiah is going to come, and they believed God's revelation and so on, and God accepts that. They did the best they could with the revelation that they had. And so you could say there, or you could say they, after death, they get, Jesus comes to them and say, hey, you didn't have full knowledge of me, but now I'm gonna break things down. See if you want to accept that. So what the point is, you have no one comes to the Father except through Jesus, but you also believe that other people who knew nothing about Jesus except for maybe some prophecies about him or something like that, but didn't have specific knowledge of him dying on the cross and rising from the dead and so on, that they can also be saved. So the thing is, you don't know how it works. So the issue is, if that can still work, how does that affect your belief about what happens if someone is on a desert island, or someone grows up as a Buddhist or something like that? How does it relate? And my answer is, I don't know. So I don't know what's going to happen. So I don't believe anyone will spend eternity with God except by going through Jesus Christ. The issue is the only way to Jesus Christ through saying some sort of prayer and accepting him? That it doesn't look like it, not even from Scripture. So no, I'm not willing to say that everyone in the world doesn't have some sort of opportunity that we're not aware of to go there.
What if you are, so Muslims say similarly, in the sense that they say that if you didn't understand Islam properly, some Muslims would say this. They would say that whatever this properly means. Now, usually they invoke this idea of the desert island. They never found out about Allah and Muhammad or whatever, and so they would be tested in some sense when they died or whatever. But like, what about someone that knows about Christianity and knows about Jesus and rejects Jesus and says, I don't believe, Jesus died for my sins? Isn't it like a doctrinal requirement of Christianity that you have to accept that Jesus died for your sins in order to go to heaven? Thank you for your donation. Okay. So, oh my God, that's so funny. I wish I could put that on the screen like you did. Jesus is Lord, top comment. Thank you for your donation. So you were saying, I was saying, so I was asking you, so isn't it the case that you have to believe that Jesus is the Son of God and he died for your sins to go to heaven? And like, do you believe in a physical hell? Is it like a hell where people are tortured and chained?
Oh, there's another issue where I'm skeptical, and it's a situation where you have 4 or 5 positions within Christian. Most of them are quite minority positions, but basically you have the literal understanding, right? That when you read fire, it means fire. When you read worm, it means worm. When you read darkness, it means darkness, right? So that is a very widespread belief. Then you have another very widespread belief, and most Christians fall into one of these two camps, a metaphorical interpretation, right? And the reason here is the general passages where you have being talked about in hell are, Jesus speaking in his parables or something, or the book of Revelations. And both of those areas are filled with lots of metaphorical language and so on. So some people conclude metaphorical. And what that means is fire means something bad. Doesn't necessarily mean you're being burned with fire, but it's a situation you don't want to be in. So it represents like it could be, if you're going with a metaphorical, you can kind of have an idea that it represents all kinds of things. So it represents like being separated from God or something like this, or eternal regret for things that you've done. It could be all kinds of things. But the idea is fire represents something else. Darkness represents something else, like being separated from the light of God or something like that. So there are people who argue that. Among Catholics, you have purgatory. You have a purgatorial view where you go to a hell-like place or something like this temporarily, and then you eventually get out. The sort of minority positions often maintained by Christian philosophers, which is why I'm familiar with them, because these are, I've been around a lot of philosophers. You have an annihilationist view. And by the way, all of these groups actually will point to scriptures and say, hey, pay attention to this, like with the annihilationist view. So this view is, yes, you go into hell, but then you're destroyed. God destroys you, he annihilates you. And even here, annihilationists will say, look, Jesus said right here, don't fear the one who can destroy the body, but after that can do nothing. Fear the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. And so there, a person would have to say, well, yeah, but by destroy, it doesn't mean actually, destroy and annihilate. It means something else. But if you just took that passage, then it would sound like annihilation. Now, the issue is you don't just have that passage. You have all these other passages that are descriptions of hell. So you have those, and then you have universalists. You even have philosophers who are universalists. So they believe everyone's going to heaven. But it's not like a feel-good universalism. Like we got, I can't imagine ever God sending anyone to hell, so God's going to send everyone to heaven, right? They actually take passages seriously. So they'll take passages like where God says that it's not his will that any perish, but that everyone is saved, right? And they will say, well, obviously, if God wants it and God is sovereign, then no one's going to overcome that. Therefore, yes, when you die, you might go to punishment or something like this, but you're going to go off to some other plane of reality where you are going to submit to Jesus, and you are eventually going to get to paradise. So you have a diversity of views. Again, the mainstream views are going to be the literal interpretation or the metaphorical interpretation. But my position is I don't know. So I usually don't. And I'm not saying that people can't know. It's more like there are certain issues, like issues with how God created the world, or the nature of hell, or Calvinism and Arminianism. And usually it's either, hey, if it's a situation where I think, okay, I don't think that I could come to a position, I don't see how the evidence could really sway me one way or another, then maybe I don't form a solid position. But on some of these issues, it's more along the lines of, I don't know enough right now. I haven't studied the issue enough to really take a firm stance. And so on something like, what is the correct view of hell? Is it literal or metaphorical, or even one of the alternatives? It's more, before I put my foot down and say, okay, this is my position, I would want to just sit down, read the entire Bible, go all the way through, and mark every single passage that has anything to do with future judgment. Put all of them together, put them into categories, look at them, read 2 or 3 books on the issue, and say, okay, this is what I think is the correct position. But I'm usually too busy with Muslims and sometimes atheists to study a lot of these other issues that would be required to come down on a firm position. So with that said, if you look at what the message of the apostles was, it was Jesus died on the cross for sins. He rose from the dead. So he's Lord. accept the gospel, accept the good news that the kingdom of God has come. So if that's their message, I would say, believe that.
So why do you think that God would set up this in such a situation that at some arbitrary point of humanity, like we've been around for 10,000. So actually, let's go back to that. Do you believe in evolution, and what do you think about that?
Well, it's gonna depend on what you mean by evolution, because if you say I believe
like chimps
if you believe
becoming humans.
Yeah, well, so you have all kinds of things, right? You have change over time. That I don't know of anyone who disputes that. And then you have like common descent, right? So common descent. Do we all come from the same ancestor and so on? And then beyond that, you have if we all did come from the same original ancestor. And here I'm not talking about Adam. I'm talking about the original like life, right? Whatever first came together as the first living cell.
DNA, right?
Yeah. So whatever first came together as the first living cell, did we all come from that? Do we all share that common ancestor? So you have different views. And here's another area I've actually held pretty much every position you can hold at some point. So when I was an atheist, I was an atheistic evolutionist, right? When I believed in evolution, but it all just happened. Then when I became a Christian, I was a theistic evolutionist. I believed in the same basic picture about how life formed. I just believe God was behind it, right? So maybe God arranges the first life, maybe guides it along the way or something like that. Couple years after that, I was young earth creationist, right? I came to hold such contempt for all the things that had misled me over time that I became a young earth creationist. So just so everyone knows, young earth creationists generally believe that God created certain kinds of animals. So he doesn't have to create every individual variation, right? So, he just creates dogs, he creates cats. They have all the genetic information packed into them that ultimately become all the different breeds of dogs and all the different breeds of cats and so on. But he creates dogs, he creates cats, and did this relatively short time ago. So somewhere, 10,000 years ago or less or something like that. So held that position for a while, then became more of an old earth creationist. So still believe in God creating various kinds, just over a much longer period of time. And then somewhere along the way realize, this is an issue that's a huge question with tons of people on various sides. And that's an issue where I just haven't done a ton of studying that would be required to form a firm position. So I just realized I don't really have a firm position. My firm position would be, so I kind of think in terms of like probabilities, right? So here's young earth creation, right? No problem reconciling young earth creation with the Bible, because they're going along. It's no problem reconciling it there. You are going to have to try and reconcile it with various dating methods and so on, showing why those dating methods are giving flawed results and things like that. So you're going to have to reconcile it with that, and lots of people in the scientific community are going to have to figure out how do you explain your position. Old earth creation, you're not going to have much of a problem in terms of creating the organisms and so on. You're going to have trouble. Where are you fitting in these large periods of time? Theistic evolution, there you're not going to have much of a problem with what most scientists are saying about life forming and so on. There you're going to have to say, okay, how are you fitting this into Scripture? How are you fitting this into the Bible? And you have a couple of explanations there as far as what the beliefs that Christians actually hold. So theistic evolutionists usually take one of two perspectives on how to reconcile this with Genesis. In both cases, they're basically saying God isn't trying to give you a basic history there in the opening chapters of Genesis. So on the one hand, they're saying that God is describing like he's building his tabernacle. So later we have the tabernacle that the Jews were to use, but they're talking about God building the heavens and the earth as his tabernacle and so on. So it's like he's raising up a tabernacle and so on. So not trying to be like scientifically precise or dates and times and things like that. They're just describing what the universe is in God's view. So that's one. The other one is to say that Bible writers really didn't have problem with various myths that people believe in them, as long as they have a correct theological perspective on the myth. So in other words, the view here would be, if you were a Christian preacher and you went out to some jungle tribe and they had this firmly entrenched belief that the earth grew out of some cosmic plant in the soil of, whatever it is, of this great cosmic force or something like that. The idea here is, you wouldn't, if you held to this view, you wouldn't say, oh, let me correct all your beliefs about, things growing out of this tree in the cosmic soil that is this force or something like this, which is, no. The cosmic soil is God, and this is what's growing out. So you don't try and destroy the myth that they believe in. You just try and, but that's God, right? God is what all of this is coming from, right? So that is one perspective. It's just a situation where I try to represent the positions accurately, but it's another situation where I would probably want to spend like 3 to 4 years of my life going through like the best proponents of each position and read them and say what they have going for them and what's against them. But I've never taken that. But I'll say this. So here's the situation. Atheistic evolution is the one that I find completely just off the rails, to where any other position that actually that could be maintained, I would find more reasonable than atheistic evolution, just because the probabilities that are involved in something like forming proteins, forming life, molecules coming together, and so on, they seem so far off in left field that I would basically take any position as stronger and better than my original position, which I held.
So I've never heard of someone call it atheistic evolution before. I thought evolution was something that is agnostic to theism and has nothing to do with theism. From my personal perspective, I actually left Islam without looking into evolution, and it was only after because I actually was believing Harun Yahya, who is basically a scammer. Yeah. So I fell for his nonsense because I wasn't educated or literate in science. And when I started to look into evolution after I left Islam, I got a bunch of Dawkins books on The Blind Watchmaker, Greatest Show on Earth. Greatest Show on Earth is an amazing book because he gives like really easy to understand examples. So there's two different things. One is abiogenesis, which is how did the first, how did like RNA and DNA and all that come across just out of inanimate matter? We know that scientists have been able to bring about RNA, which is a type of proteins, in a lab, but DNA so far we have not been able to just spontaneously create it just from doing experimentation. And it is something that is quite incredible because from DNA, all life as we know it came about. So once you have DNA, to explain how you went from DNA to what we have today, it's not too difficult to explain that because there's a lot of data to show that how it happened. So for example, the fossil record is one interesting one, which is interesting because younger creationists would also dispute the same evidence, but the fossil record shows that there's a very linear progression in the soil. So as you dig down in the soil, the lower you go, you don't find that the animals are out of order. So if you go all the way down, you'll find flowers, then you'll find like fish, then you find mammals, then you find so you'd never find, for example, a mammal below the fish, or for example a plant that was that was in the soil above. It's in a very natural order of what we believe to be evolution. So we have this sort of like a video or a movie where you can roll back the slides and you can actually see evolution happening before your very eyes. Things that were difficult. So here's another interesting thing. Evolution, we just figured it out, Darwin figured it out 150 years ago. Between when Darwin, figured it out and today, there has just been an explosion of data that has confirmed everything that Darwin said. For example, one of the predictions he made was that when he saw there was a certain type of flower that had a very deep cavity in it, and he predicted that there must be some sort of insect or bug that has a long enough snout or whatever that would be able to pollinate it. And lo and behold, they called it Darwin's moth. that has this gigantic like tongue-like thing that goes in and, you know, pollinates. So from my perspective as a theist that didn't used to believe any of this stuff, I feel like the evidence is so incredible, and so like there's so much evidence of evolution, that I just can't deny it. Like, the other thing that's kind of interesting about the whole evolution thing is why should we even have to go back? Like, if it wasn't for like holy books, would we even like question evolution? Like, we wouldn't even question it because there's no 1,000-year-old book that seems to contradict it. Whereas the Quran and the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Quran and the Bible, like the myths of like Adam and Eve, the myths of how the universe was created from in a time and place where people didn't know better. So I'll bring it back to you as a question. Like, do you believe like the entire Bible from beginning to end is inerrant word of God, or do you believe like there's some parts of the Bible which are mistaken? What is your view on the Bible, first of all? And then second question would be like, how do you like, why would you think we even need to reconcile, you know, from in a time and place when the Bible came about, or the Quran, there was like slavery, there was a lack of understanding of the natural world, you know, and you see that in the writings, in ancient writings, that people didn't know better. Like they had completely inaccurate views, as my friend Abdullah Gondal said, that when we look at everything else in life, when it comes to when it comes to anything else in life, we go to people that have the correct, you know, understanding and knowledge of it. But when it comes to religion, we go back to a time and place where people didn't know better about just basically anything about medicine, about biology. I mean, there's no holy book that ever mentions the brain, like the actual brain, the idea of a brain. They thought, you know, the thought process came in the liver or the heart. The heart is a common one. There was no concept of bacteria, anything like that. Obviously, evolution is just completely out there. It's like only 150 years ago. So why would we even bother to go back to what the Bible says when we know these people at the time didn't know better? Like, why do we hold that in special esteem? And is the whole book from God, or is it parts which we would say like there's mistakes in it? Or what do you? It's basically two questions for you.
Yeah, a couple of things there. I think you are already on the same page as the Bible, a lot more than you realize, and a lot more than really any atheists seem to realize nowadays. So think if you really, really accept an evolutionary perspective, would you think, right, prior to knowledge of science, would you think that the universe is going to be sort of regulated by neat little mathematical equations that we can go and figure out? I don't think you'd be expecting this on an atheistic perspective, right? If you said, hey, you know, all of reality is going to be governed by these neat little mathematical equations, I don't think you would think that, given an atheistic perspective. Two, would you think, hey, if the universe were like that, are those the kinds of things that we would actually be able to figure out, that human beings could understand and could go out there and figure out? If you're convinced that we were basically selected for survival and reproduction, right? So our abilities are selected so that we can find food and get a mate and pass on offspring. I don't think you'd have any basis on that for thinking, hey, we can understand the hidden secrets of the universe and how the mathematical laws that govern the universe. And three, would you think there's really any point to that? If we're sort of put together for finding food, finding a mate, and living here, would you really think that it's relevant to go out and understand the universe? And the reason I bring this up is I believe there's a reason that every last one of them, all of the pillars, the pioneers of the scientific revolution, were all Christians of one kind or another. Some Catholic, some Protestant, occasionally heretical. But you had tons of people from tons of different areas of the world. You had Babylonians who learned lots of things, Greeks, Persians, Chinese, Indians. You only ended up with something like a revolution. What I mean by revolution is within a period of about 200 years from the time it starts, you you end up with a grand unifying theory of the universe, right? So very, very quickly. But if you look at what those guys were saying, right? Many of them theologians. If you look at what they're saying about why they're going out and doing these things, you found out that they had views which came from their worldview, which basically went like this: that this universe is created by a mind. It's constantly upheld and sustained in existence by this mind, right? That's God. That's one. So is there reason to think that the universe is at bottom rational and orderly and governed by laws and so on? Well, they said yes. Two, they believe that we are created in the image of God, that we are created in the image of this mind, right? And therefore, that yes, we are capable of going out and learning these things, of figuring these things out, and of understanding the universe. And three, they believe that it's important because you can look at their quotations from the time. I can actually pull them up if you want, but you can look at their quotations from their time. They viewed what they were doing as a form of worship, right? That, hey, God wants us to be more like him, to reflect him more. And we don't just do that morally or something like that. That's intellectually. If God is infinite in knowledge, then the more knowledge and understanding we gain of how he works in the world, the more knowledge and understanding we are gaining of God. And so they regarded going out and learning about the universe and understanding its laws as a form of worship. And so as far as the idea that it's religions that conflict with science and so on, but atheism doesn't, I don't think you'd get any of that. I don't think science would have ever gotten off the ground without people who thought, hey, the universe is rational, so it can be figured out. Two, we are the kinds of things that can figure it out because we're created in the image of the maker. And three, that it is good for us to do it. It's something we could be doing anything else. We could be having fun, but it's good for us to go out here and do it. Those are the people who did the scientific revolution. And why I say that you are probably more on the same page as the Bible as you and other atheists are aware of is atheists in general now believe those things, that the universe is rational, orderly, and it's governed by natural laws and so on, that we are capable of going and figuring those things out, that it's a good thing for us to go out and do it. And sorry, you guys got that from Christians, right? You got all those views from Christians. And
so what I would say is, I don't know if you were trying to say this, maybe you didn't mean to, but there was obviously like also non-Christians that contributed to the scientific progress of humanity. For example, Ibn al-Haytham, and there's a whole bunch of Muslim, like especially in the Muslim Islamic golden age, which there was a ton of like Muslim scientists that were actually contributing to humanity as well. Like as an atheist, I would say it was despite, I don't know if I would say it's despite of, sometimes you'd hear it's despite of religion. There's been times where the church has actually held back like progress. For example, Galileo and Bruno, and how they were thrown in jail, and the Catholic Church was stopping them because they thought that what they were preaching was heretical. Do you just want to briefly touch on that before I add any more? Yeah.
I'll touch on both of those real quick. Both of those are massive misrepresentations, and I'm not trying to defend. I'm not trying to defend either, right? It was the Catholic Church. I'm not here to defend the Catholic Church's history. And if it were a situation of, hey, Galileo, you're preaching this wrong thing, and therefore we're locking you up, you could say, hey, that he was being held back. But that's a myth. We can actually trace where that myth goes back to in the 1800s of people who are writing actually to attack the Catholic Church, to attack Catholic. Huh?
Wasn't Giordano Bruno also thrown in jail because of the same type of questioning that he was doing?
No.
It was a different situation.
Yeah. Well, it's on the show. What was that show? It used to be a Carl Sagan show.
Cosmos.
Yeah. Cosmos. They claimed that it was
yes. That's why nonsense. That's why I saw this.
He got in trouble for being a pantheist. Right, he got in trouble for being a pantheist.
Okay.
Right? Because he was a Dominican friar. Right.
So it had nothing to do with. It wasn't because of the science.
It wasn't because of his scientific views. He was regarded as heretical for being a pantheist and refusing to. Pantheism, it's everything is God. Interestingly, even him, right? That's why I mentioned when I said all of the pioneers of the scientific revolution were Christian of some variety. They were either Protestant or Catholic or sometimes heretical. Bruno is one of the heretical ones, right? I mean, he's an ordained minister. He's an ordained minister. He had taken vows but he had some strange views that they held him accountable for. The Galileo one is usually, matter of fact, that's probably why they went with Bruno instead of Galileo. Too many people are catching on to the Galileo story. But with Galileo, so keep in mind Copernicus, right? Copernicus had already put together the heliocentric model of the universe, right? He didn't get he wasn't in any trouble for it. In fact, he was a canon in the Catholic Church, so he had a place in the Catholic Church. You get to Galileo, and Galileo was, now I happen to like it, but Galileo was, by all accounts, the biggest, most pompous, trash talking jerk you ever met in your life. He was massively intelligent, hugely intelligent, and could just rip apart people with his wit and so on. So he started teaching certain things, but he had developed enemies from his they weren't scientific opponents, really. They were religious opponents, because there were all kinds of people. You had geocentrists and you had heliocentrists, right? Those were pretty widespread views. Someone compelled him at some point that he would not teach that the heliocentric model was true, and he signed a document saying that he wouldn't do that. Later, he went to so years later, he wanted to put out his massive work. I think it was called a dialogue on the two chief world systems or something like that. And the Pope had a request, right? This was with the stamp of approval of the Pope, right? The Pope was saying, yes, put this out. He says, I want you to include one thought in there, that these ultimate causes, we still know so little that there could actually be multiple interpretations that we are not even aware of. And guess what? He was right on the money, right? Because they're talking about the sun being at the center of the universe and so on. Guess what? He was right. There are other systems that could actually explain this that we haven't even thought of yet, right? So Galileo agrees with the Pope. Yes, I'll include that thought in there, that maybe there are other explanations that we're not considering here, and we don't really know about the ultimate causes of these things. So Galileo writes his dialogue on the two chief world systems, and he puts that claim in the mouth of the idiot in the dialogues, right? Whose name was Simplicio, right? The simpleton, right? So the dummy says what the Pope said, right? Even though the Pope was the one saying that this has been put out. And Galileo went to the Pope to get this affirmed, didn't bother to tell the Pope that he had signed a document years earlier saying, hey, I'm not going to teach this anymore, right? I'm not going to teach this as true. So the dispute there was not, the dispute between even the people who wanted him to sign it was not, hey, don't say this. It's, you present it as a kind of theory. If you go around telling people it's true and later on it comes out that something else was true, then you've misled them. So it's more along the lines of being careful. The Pope, however, found out that Galileo hadn't told him that he had signed a contract saying he wasn't going to teach this as true. And then that he had put the quotation he asked for in the mouth of the idiot in the story. So the Pope blew up. Galileo goes before the Inquisition, right? He goes before the Inquisition. They basically recommended a slap on the wrist, that he was going to sign a document saying, I apologize. I made some poor choices. The Pope flipped out and said, no, it's got to be harsher than that. And they put him on house arrest. Okay. And so anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is this gets represented as, you see, it's this ongoing war between the church and science. When Galileo's being supported by the church the entire time. The Pope was fine with him publishing these views as long as he includes the claim that, hey, we don't know everything, and it's possible that other things are going to come out that are going to change our position. So don't think that you have the absolute truth on this one. Include that, and basically Galileo calls him an idiot, doesn't tell him about his contract, and this was all in a time where the Pope's authority is being challenged because you have the Protestant Revolution going on, and he wants to crack down and show he's tough. The point is, there's way more here than science versus religion. Galileo's a guy who spent his life ticking people off, and again, I think it's in a good way because he's hilarious. But at the end of the day, ticked off the wrong person who had his back for many years, and the guy was not very forgiving.
Okay, good answer. So as to what you said about, how there's consistency and regularity and all of that in the universe, and for example, like why is the a certain value for the speed of light? Why is there like a certain, pi, for example, or the golden ratio and all of these things? This was one of the questions I had as well. And the best explanation I could come up with, these are just the fundamental constants of our universe. I don't know that we necessarily need to posit the existence of a mind that's like an abstract mind in the cloud that's making these rules to be what they are. It could be just that this is just as how it is. There's just no explanation for it. It's just the universe.
Well, along those lines, see, I didn't say you have to posit God for the laws, and what laws I'm talking about there is like a law of gravity, right?
Yeah.
It's a little equation, and then there's a constant in there. But the idea that if I drop this pen, it's actually going to follow, it's going to obey a mathematical equation.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you think that this could obey anything? Why could this obey a law? And so the point wasn't, hey, you have to posit God as a reason for that equation. The point is, if you didn't know about the laws, which they didn't, right? They didn't back in the day. They didn't know that these things were governed by neat little formulas and that they're everywhere, right? That you find them all over the place. They didn't know that. The point is, if you've got two competing views, let's say Christian theism and atheistic naturalism, which one would you be more inclined to expect that everything's going to be governed by neat little equations, or that dropping a pen is going to follow a law? Well, if you think that at the bottom of everything is a mind, that makes perfect sense. And I'm saying historically, that's how they came to the view. It was, we believe that these things are going to be out there. You have to believe that they're out there before you go in. I mean, you could go searching for them, but you're basically saying, I'm going to dedicate my life to going out and searching for the equations of the universe.
Yeah.
Why would you do that unless you really, really thought that they were going to be there? The Christians really thought that they're going to be there. I don't think any atheist who didn't know that they were already there would even go out and search for them.
I think that the whole atheist Christian thing atheism is only something that's come about very recently. So if you go back like 1,000 years, if we were talking about people that you never know, they might have ended up atheist if it wasn't for the fact that the dominant system of religion at the time was Christian, and everybody was a Christian. Like it's only very recently now that people are really starting to say there is no God and I'm an atheist. But I do think this drive for like learning and research and to understand the universe is a very human thing at its very core. Like I as an atheist, especially without the explanation of a God, like how do we explain? And I do think that as time is going by, like this gap of knowledge is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So they kind of call it the God of the gaps idea, that when you can't explain something, Neil deGrasse Tyson is the one that actually mentioned this. He said that, it was always God did it. But as time is going by, like we like the hole that God was filling is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Before, it was like lightning is coming because of God. Rain is coming. God sends down his rain. If you don't, I mean, I don't know what Christian theology is on this, but Islamic theology is, if you don't pay your zakat, the rain will not come. But it's just a natural cycle. Like even praying for rain, it doesn't make any sense because it's a natural process that's governed by the laws of the universe and like the wind and this and that. So whether you pray or you don't pray, there's no rain is going to come. It's not going to make a difference. So I disagree. And I don't think that I don't think the Bible is a book that would inspire, or even a belief in God would inspire. In fact, I feel like belief in God is kind of like a lazy way of just saying, well, God did it. Whereas if you don't have an explanation, then you're ever more interested in trying to figure out, well, how the hell did these things come about? How the hell did the universe start? And it's interesting that, like, if it was the case before that it was Christians, and you're saying that was not just incidental, but that was because they were Christian, because the problem with religion, Islam and Christianity and Judaism and whatever, is so much energy goes into theology, and that much less effort is left for the rest of scientific endeavor. And by scientific endeavor, I just mean discovering how the body works and discovering how space is. And so I feel that, like, now, well, especially nowadays, what we find is it's mainly atheists were the natural scientists, right? Like it's atheists were like most physicists are atheists. I'm not saying atheism is true because of that. And I do actually want to add one more thing, that there is a possibility, and I do think it is quite possible that there could be a God. But I'm not convinced that this God has ever sent any revelation to humanity, because like all of the books are, like, so we could go back to that if you like. And by the way, it's 9 o'clock. We've been doing it for 2 hours. So I don't know how much longer you want to stay online. This is very interesting, but I have a feeling that there's no way we're going to get to. I have like 30 questions we didn't even get touched before yet. So
I just wanted to address a couple of things you just mentioned. So now the point you made about human beings, it's just natural part of being human that we're going to go out and seek knowledge and try to understand the universe. Now think about that. Assuming that the Christian view of human beings is correct, that the universe is created by this mind that governs everything by laws, that creates us in his image, and that this is what makes us. It's in trying to be like our maker and understanding things. This is what actually gives human beings, not just Christians, but everyone, this drive to go out and understand the universe. That seems to fit in pretty well. If the atheistic perspective is correct, right? Human beings developed over a period of many millions of years. You have this evolutionary process, and we're basically primates. We got smarter than the other primates, right? Because it gave us some sort of selection advantage. In other words, the way brains formed helped some of our ancestors survive and reproduce better than other ancestors. If you didn't know that we have this drive to understand the universe and that we're going out and doing this, if you just laid down the atheistic story and said, this is how human beings arose. They got bigger brains, which gave them some extra abilities. And this, so they were a bit smarter than other things, so they could find food better than other things. And they had an advantage because they could form weapons to stab other things. I would still be surprised on that worldview if it's okay. And once they formed, then they had this drive to go out and understand the entire universe, and they did, and they were able to find out the equations, the mathematical equations that govern the universe. That would still be very surprising to me. So anyway, I just wanted to point out that that's kind of the thinking involved here, is that the entire project of science and understanding the universe and our view of human beings, whether we admit it or not, we both view ourselves as vastly beyond anything else. That doesn't fit very well on one view. It fits very well on another view. We are clearly massively distinct from everything else and being created in the image of God. So there's that. As far as the God of the gaps, interesting God of the gaps, that was actually first put forward by multiple Christians over the years. Christians are the ones who brought up the God of the gaps objection, and they brought it up because they noticed that people were going to areas of ignorance and saying, hey, that thing over there that we haven't figured out, that's where God is. And then the response from Christians, this came from Christians, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a guy who was part of an assassination Christian minister, was part of an assassination plot against Hitler, was one of the people who put forward the God of the gaps objection. And the point for Christians was, hey, anytime you're arguing based on our ignorance, we eventually might figure those things out. And so did God somehow shrink or something like that? Or the explanatory power? They use the objection. They use the objection to say, guys, what are you talking about? God is the one who's responsible for everything, right? God creates the universe. God creates the laws. Every time we go out. So the perspective here is, so if I'm an atheist caricature of a Christian, an atheistic caricature of a Christian is like, if I drop this pen, I know I found out that it's going to fall, but how it falls and the rate at which it falls and the equation, I can't figure that out. God's doing it. God's doing it, right? So for earlier Christians, it was, what are you talking about? Don't we want to know about God? Don't we study the scriptures so we can know about God? If we've got, they called the world the book of the world, right? The book, there's the book of the universe. This is called the two books system, right? You have your book of scripture, which they said, this is what tells you how to get to heaven. Then you have this book out here, where you're reading about how God, you're reading the universe about how God does things, right? And so the idea here is, yes, you know that this pen drops, But you don't say, and it wouldn't have crossed any of the pioneers of the scientific revolution's minds to say, well, we're Christians, we just say God did it, and then we go and pray, right? It's no, we want to know how God does this, right?
Yeah.
We want to know how the universe works. We want to know how planets move. We want to know all of this. This is all part of our worship. So the God of the gaps objection, as it was used by Christians, was, guys, stop focusing on the little areas of ignorance. Focus on all this stuff that we know. These are things that we're learning about God, learning all of these, because again, the idea is, you're a Christian and you say, oh, I don't know the law of gravity. So I just say God did it. And then, we figured it out. And now there's no room for God. Yeah. The point of the God of the gaps objection was, what are you talking about? In discovering it, you haven't put God out of a job. Yeah. You're figuring it out. You're figuring out how God does it, basically. Yeah.
That's a great point. And that's a good point. Yeah, you're right about that. I do think, though, there is definitely certain questions which are considered untouchable by science, that when science actually solves these problems, then it would be like an actual God of the gaps. For example, how did life, like, you could still say that God did it. Like, for example, evolution, even if you believe that evolution is, from simple life to complicated life over, billions of years, you could still say God did it. And many Muslims do say, for example, and Christians as well, say that God does evolution, that all of this is done by God. And that is true. But I think there's going to be certain points where, for example, if he managed to cure death, like if he managed to solve death, which is something that scientists are actually working on, that is a type of thing that would actually, I think, in a sense, kill God, because everything about the hereafter, everything that we know, like about religion, requires us to die at some point. And if we ever get to the point where we manage to cure aging, which is an actual thing that they're working on, maybe they'll never solve it, maybe they will. Scientists do think at some point we will be able to do that. Like things like that, things like how human beings came about, like evolution, basically. Evolution is something that was considered God's domain. Not evolution per se, but how did humans come about? And we thought that we were created just, with God's hands or whatever, with some sort of special beings. But as we learn more about reality, as we learn how we're just like a little dot in a gigantic universe of nothingness, it seems to be nothingness, these type of things, they humble you and they make you feel like not necessarily that there's no God, but that the holy books that we have, they don't match like reality as we know it, which is why I left Islam. So I don't want to keep you any longer, but we should do another. Do you want to add any? Do you want to respond to that, and then we can just kind of maybe do another talk another time, because there's so many things we didn't get to talk about.
Yeah, I would just sort of a general idea. It's you have a couple different ways you can proceed in investigating things. Me, I like to take things that I know, and then the areas I don't know. The areas I don't know, I sort of, sometimes I withhold judgment or so on them, but those are basically learning opportunities. So in terms of something like Christianity or Islam or anything else, it's kind of what reason do I have to accept that this is true? I understand I don't have all the answers yet, and there may be problems to address and so on. When I look at something like Islam, it's and I ask a Muslim, hey, are there any good reasons to believe this? They say, yes, all kinds of reasons. And then I start looking at the individual reasons, and the arguments fall apart as soon as I start investigating, right? As soon as I start examining them, right? The Quran's been perfectly preserved from the time it was revealed. You spend 5 minutes actually looking at changes in the Quran, looking up changes in the Quran, you realize that it's just silly. It's a myth. It's a total myth. With Christianity, it's, yes, I could go to the Bible and I could say, hey, this doesn't make sense, or this sounds bad, or something. But if I'm looking, hey, if there is a God, and if God has revealed anything to humanity, where would I want to actually start looking for that? Essentially, there are only a handful of religions out there that actually say this is how you can know it, right? There's tons of religions, right? There's only a handful that say, and this is how you can know that this religion is true. Here's something you can go out and look into. Islam is like that. Mormonism is like that. Christianity is like that. They all say, here's how you can know that this is true. Well, when you go to the main argument that Christians have been putting forward for over the centuries, it's that Jesus died on the cross for sins and rose from the dead. And so the resurrection would be sort of this is how you can know that this is true. Well, when you go there, you actually find there's something there. It's not like in Islam where they say, oh, here's how you can know that it's true, and you go there and there's just nothing there. In Christianity, there is something there. And so in that situation, if I think, hey, of all the people in history, Jesus has God's stamp of approval, and therefore I need to take what he says seriously, you're still left with a lot of other issues, right? How do you reconcile this book with this morally? How do you reconcile this part of the book with this scientifically? How do you do that? Those are all questions, but it's never crossed my mind that, you know, if I have these things to figure out, therefore I ignore this thing which I know, this thing that I have good evidence for. And so as far as proceeding and having all kinds of questions, yeah, you can have all these kinds of questions. There are tons of Christians who have all these kinds of questions, but the idea is we have reason to believe that that what we're claiming is true. And so other areas, yeah, we still have to go on and figure out. So yeah, but yeah, as far as future discussions, might be good to focus on a couple of these issues, like dedicate a live stream to a particular issue, like, you know, morality, perspectives on science or ethics and things like that. Yeah. So.
Absolutely. Okay. That was amazing. Thank you so much for coming on my channel, and for having me on your channel as well. Guys, that was David Wood. Do check out his channel and subscribe if you haven't. It'll be a pin drop in his 350,000.
Oh, hey, can I respond to one comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Looks like it's from a Muslim. He says, name one change in the Quran. In Sahih Muslim, I'll name you several. In Sahih Muslim, Abu Musa says that 2 entire chapters of the Quran were lost. They were forgotten. And he's talking to the reciters of Basra, and he says, don't harden your hearts the way we did, and we forgot 2 entire chapters of the Quran. And he even gives a verse from one of those chapters. It's not in the Quran. He says Muslims forgot them by hardening their hearts. You have Aisha saying that 2/3, more than 100 verses from Surah 33 came up missing. Because Muslims just didn't recite them enough. You even have Aisha saying that the verse of stoning and of breastfeeding an adult 10 times were in the Quran, were still part of the Quran when Muhammad died, but she had the only copy, and a sheep came in and ate it. So those verses aren't in the Quran today. You look in your sources; they're supposed to be in the Quran, but a sheep ate them. That's the explanation. So you look at those kinds of things, and plenty more examples. But I can tell by the question. That you're not familiar with any of this, so you might want to look it up. And the point here is, whether we're atheists or Christians or Muslims, we should be convinced that that we should look into the evidence. And just because someone tells us to believe something doesn't mean that it's true. And I hope, my friend, that you would go out there and look, because we're looking for a light switch moment, which Abdullah here's been through. I've been through, where you look and say, wait a minute, this is something I believe for many years, but the evidence actually refutes me on this, and so maybe I need to change my position. And the light switch moment we're looking for you is your leaders and your community have been telling you all your life, perfect preservation of the Quran, it's a miracle. Again, if you spend 5 minutes looking in that, in fact, I'll just say, the entire reason you have the Quran as a book, look it up, do a little research on the actual history. The entire reason you have the Quran as a book was because so much of it was lost when Muslims who had parts of it memorized died in battle. Abu Bakr said, this is after Muhammad's death, Abu Bakr said, in order to avoid losing more, we need to put it into a book form. That way, if more of us die, we'll at least have the book so that we don't lose any more. So the entire basis of having the Quran as a book was that so much of it had already been lost due to people dying in battle. And the fact that your leaders can go around telling you, hey, perfect preservation, this is the miracle of the Quran. You might want to look at that. And once you do, and you realize they're filling your head with nonsense, then the question should arise, if they misled me about that, what else have they misled me about? All right.
Yeah. That was a great answer. I have 2 videos on this as well that take a different angle that doesn't depend on hadith, which is there's a lot of academic research that's come to light now about the Quran, and I think Jay Smith has done a bunch of work on this as well. The Sana'a manuscript, or the Palmum set, shows that there were earlier versions of the Quran that are no longer in circulation. I have another video about the 7 variants of the Quran and how this shows that the Quran was not preserved, because the 7 or the 10 variants, or whatever, how many variants they are, that's another example of how there's like multiple Qurans that now are all mixed up and jumbled together. So I do have 2 videos on that, and neither of those require any additional hadith. Again, I just want to say one more thing for David Wood, because we talked about this on your channel, but we didn't talk about it on mine, that I have to thank David Wood because he's one of the people that actually helped me to leave Islam. While I was doing my research in all of the issues with Islam, like when I was having doubts, I came across David Wood's videos and some of his writings, and some of the topics, for example, how Jesus doesn't make sense in Islam, how Muhammad took one of his wives' nights away, Sauda's night, and gave it to Aisha, and how the funny thing is I had heard the story 100 times, but I never once thought about it that this is unfair, because I just assumed he's a perfect man, so everything he does is fine, so you don't even like question that. But when I actually heard you say, like, how is this like a good husband? How is this what a good husband does? I was like, dang, he's right. That's not what a good husband would do. That's what a bad husband would do.
Yeah. Which it would be one thing if Islam said, hey, Muhammad was a flawed human being. He made all sorts of mistakes, all sorts of problems in his life, but God still revealed the revelation to him anyway. Yeah. But instead it's, no, this is your pattern of conduct. He's so wonderful. We'll kill you for criticizing him.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. Do you want to add anything else before we leave? That's it.
Oh, no, I'm good. So looks like you got a pretty good crowd here.
Yeah, 430. That's more than, I think that's 430 people. That's more than I ever had. So they must have come from your channel. Lots of David Wood fans. Or
they just want to hear a atheist, ex-Muslim, and Christian former atheist have a discussion.
Okay, let's do this again sometimes. Thanks everyone. Good night, good morning, whatever. Bye bye.
All right.